along to our second Irish Planning Lunch and Learn CPD events. Based on the success of last year's first CPD programme, we took the decision to look at all the feedback, which was overwhelmingly positive, but it really highlighted the need for more training. So we have designed less sessions this time, but with a more targeted practice-based focus. And in today's case, we've got more speakers as well. So we have over 700 participants registered for these upcoming October sessions, which is tremendous. And it doesn't only just show the level of interest in this area, but it really demonstrates the sheer need for more training and education. So it's the intention of the Marine Spatial Planning Committee in this series to build upon what we had last year, but also looking more specifically into marine-related topics that are going to contribute to professional practice in MSP. And again, we're going to seek your views of what we can offer in the future. So any feedback or ideas, please do send on to us. So we're going to build today on we're going to start with today on a departmental update on recent developments in marine spatial planning. So we've got two presentations from the department, so Department of Environment, Climate and Communications, and then we've got an update from the Maritime Area Regulatory Authority as well, so MARA. And then on the subsequent two Fridays, we are going to hear about coastal erosion and land-sea interactions. And then in the last session, we will look at marine interaction of marine activities and appropriate assessment as well. So I would really just like to thank my colleagues on the MSP committee for their commitment in organising this CPD. And also thank you to the IPI for the support it's offered us in terms of hosting these sessions. And in particular, thanks to Shelley and to Sean for their advice and backup. We couldn't have done it without them. Particular thanks is also due to the department for its support. So not only do we have speakers from the department, but in addition, we've got some funding as well that has allowed us to upgrade the IPI website. So this means that we can upload all the presentations and the recordings from the session, and it will allow us to do some more training as well. So just to note that these presentations will go up onto the website after the sessions, but not the Q&A sessions. So the format over the next couple of weeks is that we're going to have 2 or 3 speakers who will make short presentations of around 15 to 20 minutes, one after the other, and then we'll follow that by the Q&A. So you can type your questions into the chat box and I'll try and get through as many as I can. We will finish at 2 o'clock. A small evaluation survey will pop up onto your browsers afterwards, same as last time, and we'd really appreciate any feedback that you can give us. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker for today. So this is Marie Minahan. She is the Principal Officer in DEC with responsibility for marine planning legislation, and she's going to give us a presentation just with a short update on developments on marine spatial planning. So Marie, it's over to you if you want to share your screen.
Thank you, Heather. Okay, so let me just hopefully share this presentation. And you might just let me know if it is okay. So can you see that?
Yeah, absolutely perfect.
Okay, perfect. So hi, everybody. Lovely to talk to you. My name is Marie Minahan. I'm a Principal Officer in the Department of Environment with responsibility for marine planning legislation. So I suppose the purpose of this update is just to give you an understanding of the structures or the organisational structures for marine planning in DEC at the moment. So as you know, marine planning has moved. So under the Minister for Housing, there was significant reform of the marine planning regulatory functions over the last number of years. So in 2021, we had the National Marine Planning Framework and the Maritime Area Planning Act, and that was followed in July 23 by the establishment of MARA. So in 2022, I think it was, the Attorney General had completed a review of the regulatory systems, and one of his findings was that there was a need for better coordination of the regulatory systems. So as Minister with responsibility for protection of Ireland's environment, as well as a range of maritime functions, the Minister for Environment agreed with the Department of Housing that the functions of the Maritime Area Planning Act and the Foreshore Act should transfer over to the Department of Environment. And this was to allow, the achievement of the climate action goals. So, as part of that government decision, it was noted that notwithstanding the excellent work that was completed in the Department of Housing, significant additional resources would be required to allow the department to give full effect to the maritime regulatory system. And the Minister for Environment committed to engaging with the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform on that matter in terms of getting additional resources. So government completed that decision in December 2023, and the functions under the Maritime Area Planning Act and the Foreshore Act transferred to the Minister for Environment, Climate and Communications. So the move of the Marine Planning and the MAP Act was provided for in primary legislation through the Gas Amendment and Miscellaneous Provisions Act. And the move of the Foreshore Unit was provided for in secondary legislation in SI 236 of 24. And these changes were given effect in May 2024. So just in terms of the Marine Planning Act, so the functions under the MAP Act and the Foreshore Act transferred to the Minister for Environment. So that's forward planning, occupancy management and enforcement in the maritime area. So they're now the responsibility of the Department of Environment. So obviously in the MAP Act, Part 8 of the MAP Act inserted Part 21 into the Planning and Development Act, dealing with development management in the maritime area. So responsibility for the Planning and Development Act and hence marine development management remains with the Department of Housing. But the marine planning units in DEC, have always and will continue to work closely with planning colleagues in the Department of Housing to ensure that there's strong cohesion between the land and the marine regulatory systems. So just to give a sense of what moved, so in the Department of Housing, marine planning was situated in the water function. So we had marine planning policy and legislation and the foreshore unit, so two principal officer-led units. So as part of the review of the organisational structures in the Department of Environment, it was identified that additional units would be required. So we're now situated in under Assistant Secretary Philip Nugent, and it's the Unit of Environment Protection, Circular Economy and Governance. So we now have 4 units. We have Marine Planning Policy, Marine Planning Legislation, Marine Planning Advisory, and MARA Governance and Regulation. And there's a commitment to have significant additional technical resources to support these units. So I'll just quickly go through the 4 units now. So the first is Marine Planning Governance and Regulation. So this was formerly the Foreshore Unit, and this is led by Principal Officer Claire Finn. The focus of this division is to give full effect to the phase out of the foreshore function and transition it to MARA. They also have responsibility for MARA governance and oversight under the Code of Practice and the Maritime Area Planning Act 21. So, their key focus and functions are the ongoing management of the residual foreshore function. So there's an active caseload of applications that were received prior to MARA establishment, and these need to be managed to determination. So this is a hard and historic caseload, and it needs to be brought to conclusion or, where appropriate, transitioned to MARA. They also have responsibility for any litigation or judicial reviews in connection with applications under the Foreshore Act. And finally, they also provide a post-establishment service to MARA in terms of HR, IT, and foreshore estate management under a service level agreement. And this will come to a close as soon as MARA is fully established. So the next is the Marine Planning Policy Unit. So this is led by Rory O'Leary, Principal Officer, and Rory has recently returned from MARA. So their focus is ensuring that marine spatial planning works for all marine and maritime users, that they're an enabler of economic development and opportunity for Ireland in a planned and managed way, that the marine spatial planning is reflective of national priorities and balances all the competing interests, and through coordination and collaboration across government will ensure that the NMPF is adhered to as the guiding marine spatial plan. And then finally, they want to ensure that they provide for significant stakeholder and societal engagement. So what you'll see coming from this unit, so in the next month, the Marine Planning Policy Statement will be presented for public consultation. So this is a document in which the government sets out high-level objectives and priorities in respect of marine planning. And it's a guiding policy document, and you'll see throughout the MAP Act that there's a requirement to have regard to the MPPS when it's in place. Next, there is a stakeholder advisory group. So this has been re-established. I think there's been 2 meetings, and the purpose of this group is to allow the department to learn from and engage with the many number of experts across the marine stakeholder group. So it's quite a large unit, and the intention is really to draw on that expertise. Next, there is a cross-departmental group called the Project Ireland Marine 2040 Group, and this is being re-established to drive coordination in marine-related policy matters across government. And the first meeting of this re-established group is happening next Monday. Finally, then, for this group, in terms of forward planning, this group will have responsibility for developing the principles and criteria for assessing the need for future DMAPs. We'll see that coming in the near future. Okay, then the next group is my own group, Marine Planning Legislation. So our focus is ensuring that the Maritime Area Planning Act, that the secondary legislation is fully enacted. Additionally, we'll address any operational issues with the MAP Act if they arise through primary legislation. And we have responsibility to ensure cohesion between the MAP Act and the Planning and Development Act as it is and the forthcoming bill. So we're expecting to bring forward amendments to the MAP Act as part of the Environmental Protection Agency Bill. These amendments remain subject to government approval, but may address things like working with MARA to understand any issues and optimising operation if needed, clarifying the DMAP making process and supporting the wind-up of the foreshore unit. Priorities in terms of secondary legislation will be the identification of relevant emergency works, specifications of non-material amendments, identification of data to which the Maritime Authorisation Database will apply, and providing for exemptions to Part 5 where appropriate. So the unit will also work closely with consent and licence givers to support the commencement of the Maritime Authorisation Database, and that may include possible delegation of the running of that database to MARA. So the last group then, last but not least, is the Marine Planning Advisory Group. So this is being led by Karina Fitzgerald, and this is coming on foot of that commitment for additional technical resources. So this is a dedicated technical marine planning advisory team, and it's being established at the moment. It'll be headed by a senior marine planning advisor. It's a multidisciplinary team with expertise in the fields of planning, marine ecology, ornithology, marine engineering, GIS and data, and environmental assessment. So these posts will be clarified and will be filled over the next coming months. So this team will be tasked with delivery of planning solutions up to and including designated maritime area plans. And the team will also provide marine planning advisory services for the department more broadly. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much. I'll just stop sharing there now.
Marie, thank you. That was absolutely brilliant. Really good update there. There's so much happening with you guys.
There is,
it's almost hard to keep control, but that was really useful in terms of giving us a brief update. So thank you. Next, then we have Rob. So Rob, if you want to share your screen. So just while Rob is getting his screen sorted out, that is super. I will tell you a little bit about Rob. So I'm sure many of you on the call do know Rob, but just to remind you that Rob Fennelly is going to provide us with an update on the South Coast DMAP. But he's a planning advisor working within the Planning Advisory Division for Marine of DEC since December 2023. And since joining DEC, he has worked with the project team in the International and Offshore Renewable Energy Division in the development of that DMAP for offshore renewable energy. So previously, Rob has worked as a regional planning officer with the Southern Regional Assembly and as a senior executive planner with Dublin City Council, and has also worked within private consultancy and has worked internationally in Auckland Council as well. And Rob holds a master's in regional urban planning from UCD, a BA in economics and geography from UCC, and very brilliantly, we have him on board our Marine Planning Committee as well. So Rob, over to you when you're ready.
Thank you, Heather. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining today, and thanks for this opportunity as well. In giving this presentation, I'm conscious that you may have had previous insight into the process of the preparation of the South Coast Designated Maritime Area Plan, especially in the early summer area this year. There was a webinars which explained the process and the drafting stage. So I am going to recap on some of that. Some of you may have participated in that, so I will go over that again just for context and for others that have joined who may not have caught those. And again, just acknowledge and give this presentation today on behalf of a wide team who've been involved throughout the department, and my colleagues, especially Conor McCabe, Mark Willis, and Karina Fitzgerald, would have presented updates and different forms previously for the plan. So I'm going to give a very high-level overview of the context, the process to date, but I really want to emphasize, maybe since the last time you had an update, the consultation process itself and the next steps. And from my involvement in the Marine Planning Committee, just want to reflect, I suppose, as a planner working in marine spatial planning, what I've observed as the kind of positives and the interesting aspects as more and more planners and other professions will engage in marine spatial planning, and just some of the things that strike as innovative and new and good opportunities working in marine spatial planning. So I'll just give a very brief background again to the context, which I know we'll all be familiar with, but obviously offshore renewable energy is critical for Ireland to achieve its decarbonisation, its net zero transition, and its energy security. We have legally binding targets, again, which we'll be well aware of, that by 2030, the offshore sector, offshore wind, will generate 5 gigawatts by 2030. At the end of 2030, and looking at the medium then to longer term, 20 gigawatts generated offshore by 2040 and 37 gigawatts by 2050. So these are significant targets, but essential to achieve for our climate emergency. What there has been positively in the recent years is a strengthening of the legislative and policy framework for marine planning to enable designated maritime area plans to come to fruition, to be prepared. And examples from the legislative point of view, the adoption of the Maritime Area Planning Act in 2021 was a significant milestone for the country. The National Marine Planning Framework in 2021 as well, given the policy context and national policy objectives for the marine, and the establishment of the Maritime Area Regulatory Authority in 2023. So I think we all see, like, every year that there's more evolution and involvement of legislation and policy frameworks for planning for the sustainable future of our marine resources. And this designated maritime area plan is part of that journey. And it's the first designated maritime area plan to be prepared under the new legislation in the state. So why a plan-led approach? It kind of stems from a policy decision adopted by governments in 2023. Again, just recognising that the more that resources to manage sustainably management resources in our vast maritime area, that a plan-led approach is a sustainable ecosystems-based approach, especially for the offshore sector. Looking at the potential of our offshore resources for renewable energy, and to make sure there's a plan-led system to ensure that the locations that are brought forward follow that thorough assessment and consultation process. So this was a decision led by government in 2023. It was to deliver a secure, sustainable, cost-effective supply of indigenous energy for future generations, to unlock our green energy export opportunities from the offshore and renewable energy resources, to make sure that we harness the transformational economic, societal and environmental opportunities presented by Ireland's offshore wind resource, and to make sure that we accelerate designated areas for offshore renewable energy through the legislative provisions for designated maritime area plans through the Maritime Area Planning Act. So to ensure that the environmental and the public consultation processes are very much part of that plan making processes. So this then led to, in 2020, earlier in 2023 in July, to the proposal for the South Coast Designated Maritime Area Plan. An area of over 8,000 square kilometres was identified off the south coast of Ireland. The remit of this plan was to look at the delivery of 900 megawatt offshore renewable energy for deployment by 2030, and also to look at future areas post 2030. So the provision of 900 megawatts will be part of that 5 gigawatt target but to 2030, but to look at the medium and longer term targets as well, and what locations would be suitable following in-depth analysis in the study area to contribute to those targets. So why the South Coast initially as the first plan, designated maritime area plan for offshore renewable energy? The sea depths largely looked at the seabed conditions and where it would be most feasible to deploy fixed turbine technology, given that we have a significant marine resource, but they are deep seas by international standards, and for fixed turbine technology, especially looking at sea depths. There were suitable sea depths off the south coast. The wind resources themselves, the grid capacity, that there is an ability to connect with the grid, the existing grid network, 900 megawatts through connection points along the southern coast, which was a determining factor as well for locating the first designated maritime area plan here. Also, and this is significant, that there's a growing, in terms of the national planning framework, that in terms of regional development also, there's a significant growing population and employment base in the south coast. Particularly on the south coast, you've got the cities and metropolitan areas of Cork, Waterford, key towns like Wexford. We've got 3 ports as well, multiple ports and harbours on the south coast, which would facilitate the supply chain delivery of ORE and all the supply chain activities around that. So that there are multiple reasons why the South Coast was chosen there, just some of them. So this proposal then was brought forward in July and in 2023, and went through a comprehensive process over 9 weeks of public engagement over August to October. And following that and the initiation of the SEA and AA process, an SEA and AA must be carried out for a designated maritime area plan. The feedback shaped the preparation of that draft plan. So the process and steps in preparing a designated maritime area plan are not that dissimilar to a land use plan, but a key notable additional areas of focus, I guess, would be what we know about the marine environment. It is complex, obviously, and there's a need for an understanding of that baseline environment, survey work, analysis of data, and the ecosystems-based approach as well, which is required under legislation to make sure that the socioeconomic environmental data underpins your identification of areas for activities in the marine area. So a lot of preliminary survey and analysis leading to the publication of the proposal, ongoing data analysis constraint, environmental and technical constraint analysis, assessment, that iterative process through the environmental assessment process, and consultation. Again, early stage consultation, and as the draft developed, consultation with key stakeholders, cross-government, departmental stakeholder groups, including environmental groups as well. It would then lead to what we had early in the summer, the publication of the draft DMAP itself, with its strategic environmental assessment and its appropriate assessment, the Natura impact statement. On in-depth consultation at that stage, coming off that consultation, under the legislation, you refine your draft, and that refined draft is brought to the Houses of the Oireachtas by the Minister of the Environment for approval to make the DMAP. So Section 22 of the MAP Act sets out what a designated maritime area plan should contain. And again, just at a high level, just to remind that it must be consistent. A designated maritime area plan must be consistent with the National Maritime Planning Framework. Your DMAP must set out which objectives in the NMPF that you're seeking to attain or assist. You must set out the geographical and sectoral areas, or both, of the maritime area proposed to be the subject of the DMAP. The extent of the maritime area proposed to be utilised by the maritime usages must be identified. Any prohibitions or restrictions to be imposed on those maritime uses, any proposed co-location or coexistence with other maritime activities, and very importantly, propose measures to avoid, mitigate any adverse impacts on maritime uses on protected sites, species, or habitats. You must identify proposals to avoid and mitigate potential adverse effects on the environment, or benefit the environment and benefit protected marine sites. Also proposals to avoid or mitigate any potential adverse effects on other lawful uses of the maritime areas. So these are all considerations legislatively that must be considered in the preparation of the plan. And these were all very much to the fore in the drafting and the consultation processes. So again, just a similar diagram, again, just showing the importance of your study area identification, your data analysis, constraints and environmental, the constraint exploration, environmental sensitivity analysis, which informs where locations could be proposed, but equally important where locations are not suitable. So it's a constant filtering, if you like, of data and evidence and consultation to inform the identification of areas, public consultation on that, and through the consultation processes, then refinement and bringing it to government, to the House of the Oireachtas for approval. So I just want to quickly overview stuff that many of you may be familiar with at the time of the draft consultation, but there was that in-depth constraints and environmental analysis over more than 200 environmental data sets and layers of best available data to inform the site identification of locations within the study area for offshore renewable energy. And that included data on perimeters such as the location of fisheries, key fisheries grounds, aquaculture, commercial fisheries, and the protected sites in the maritime area, maritime habitats, marine archaeology, shipping lanes, high intensity shipping traffic, the location of cables, corridors for interconnectors, offshore disposal sites, military considerations as well in the marine, looking at closer to the shore as well, tourism activities, visual sensitivity close to the shoreline. Technical analysis, then looking at the bathymetry, the conditions of bedrock, wind speeds, wave strengths, tidal currents. So that's just a very brief snapshot of the amount of data analysis that goes into identifying the constraints, the constraint layers. So basically the process, and this was all documented with the draft in a technical report prepared by specialists who worked with the department, and again, all iterative as part of the SCA and AA process as well. But you start to kind of screen out or exclude certain areas based on either their individual or the consolidated cumulative constraints environmentally and also technically. So what you see here, for example, in the dark grey shaded areas are locations which are ruled out as you undertake that analysis. Some of the lines that you're seeing would be example of the high intensity shipping traffic, the cable corridors, but the overall combined constraints start to shape basically where you should not go, and the locations then that are open that are less sensitive and can be explored further for offshore renewable energy. So some of the example of the technical analysis then were to exclude areas greater than 75 meters water depth. Again, sea depths off the south coast would be very deep by international standards, so it is a deep sea location. So the further out you go for fixed turbine technology, it would be unviable for fixed turbine deployment. So again, just when you start restricting in the location options, if you like, begin to refine and to show where is best feasible from an environmental point of view and also from a technical feasibility point of view. Part of that looks at the levelized cost of energy, which would be where obviously it has to be economically viable because the location for the offshore wind project, the electricity generated has to be like affordable electricity back to service Ireland's needs. That the needs of our population, our economy. So if the higher the cost to provide, the higher that it'll be either prohibitive to construct, or the cost of energy back would be too high. So levelized costs are a consideration, and that was looked at as well within the area that was environmentally and technically assessed to be the most suitable. But it is important to say that levelized cost alone wasn't the primary determinant. The environmental analysis was the priority, followed by that technical analysis, and levelized cost was considered then within those areas. If it was levelized cost alone, locations much closer to the shore could have been brought forward. But again, it just shows that strength of that ecosystems-based approach and the evidence base needed for an ecosystems-based approach. So ultimately, it led to the identification at the time of the draft consultation, which commenced in May this year, of four maritime areas. Area A, which is Tonua, approximately over 306 kilometers squared, with a mean water depth of 57 meters. That would be the location, the first location for a 900 megawatt project to be brought forward. It is a large spatial area. It's not the location of a project, it's a large spatial area within which a project may be considered and brought forward for its maritime area consent and its planning assessments. There is spatial flexibility within that to allow the actual, for further assessment and for a project location to be cited. So again, that's just important, and this very much came out in the consultation. These are not project locations, these are spatial areas within which further assessments will determine where the project should be located within that spatial area. The areas for B, C, and D are very much recognised as longer term deployment post 2030 period, but it was important from the environmental perspective as well, and for cumulative assessment to give that longer term picture, and importantly again kind of screen and determine where we should avoid adverse environmental impacts and where it might be technically feasible in the long term for deployment. So that's where B, C, and D are identified. B is Libon, over 360 kilometers squared. Again, a deep water location, 71 meters average depth. Location C, Mananon, over 360 kilometers squared again, and mean water depth there 69 meters. And area D, Danu, over 300 kilometers squared and 67 meters depth. So again, deep water locations, but it was important that we give that future indication for the long-term deployment within the South Coast. That gives certainty for industry investment needed, both offshore and onshore, for long-term infrastructure to realise the ORE potential here. Important to recognise as well that the plan not only does identify locations, it identifies a suite of policy objectives which set out under themes for the maritime areas, plan level measures for implementation and governance, protection of marine environment and biodiversity, coexistence, especially coexistence with agriculture and fisheries, for shipping, coexistence with tourism and recreation, with telecommunications, marine archaeology, the importance of land and sea interactions, port and harbour infrastructure, transmission infrastructure, economic growth potential, and commitment to ongoing local and community engagement. So there are a suite of policy objectives which must be implemented through the planning system. And so the project developers will upfront a lot of these policy objectives are informed through consultation and informed through the iterative environmental assessment process. So there are strong measures and requirements in there at the time of the planning assessments, but post-planning and during the construction and operation, to formally protect the environment, make sure the enabling infrastructure is delivered in tandem, and to make sure that the positive benefits of ORE for the coastal communities is realised, and including that all-important coexistence with other maritime activities. So I'm just going to conclude here shortly, but just want to give a flavour of the consultation process that happened in summer this year. So between the May and June, the 3rd of May, the 6th of June, there was 14 in-person events took place throughout the coastal counties that joined the South Coast EMAP. So that was in Wexford, Waterford and Cork. engagement throughout the evenings, morning time evenings, panel discussions were held. There was public webinars throughout that as well on the 23rd, 29th of May and 10th of June. There was briefings to local, to elected members at local authorities, briefings to the regional assembly members, meetings took place with key stakeholders, including environmental NGOs, students in university colleges, especially in the location for the offshore renewable locations, the Southeast Technological University, for example, in both its Wexford and Waterford campuses. The department had also engaged very valuable role for a community liaison officer, Captain Brian Fitzgerald, and Brian would have been involved with us at that throughout the public consultation events, and was available to assist any queries from the communities on the process, how to engage, how to get involved, and to explain, the technical analysis, the environmental assessments, etc. So I suppose and we also had the services of a fishing liaison officer as well for that more direct interaction with the fishing communities. So it was in depth, it was comprehensive, but it was very, very rewarding as well. And I suppose kind of a key message of that, even at the national level, when the government department is preparing designated maritime plans, you have to have that local level engagement and hear the issues and engage closely at local level. So it was a successful, it was comprehensive and successful. It generated over 350 submissions, in-depth submissions, and they covered a range of themes, raising legitimate concerns, and that in turn led to kind of strengthening and improvement of the plan and measures, the policy objective measures, and for the implementation and governance in particular. So themes raised across commentary on the locations themselves, especially the location of Area A, the fishers themselves. Again, there's a lot of detail in there for the fishing sector, but still kind of further assurances and protection measures kind of sought through the consultation, and across the board and commentary on the environmental impact, the coexistence of the land-sea interactions. So I just want to show an example here of the type of policy objectives that are contained within the plan. We have an example here which of the iterative process, both consultation and environmental assessment, is the concept of regional level surveys. And this is sought through a number of policy objectives, including policy objective MI1, where there will be established, following the approval of the plan, the implementation of governance structures. One of the first things they will do is commission the undertaking of regional level surveys, which will be continual throughout the lifetime of the plan. And that will be ongoing environmental assessment, ongoing data collection, data sharing, and surveying, especially the post permissions in Area A, looking at the longer term rollout of B, C, and D, continual survey work to inform the project level assessments, and to make sure that's all shared data for all stakeholders, for those making the applications, assessing the applications, and observing. The marine environment is complex, and we use best available data. Species are mobile, as we know, ornithology and marine mammals, so we need to continually commission survey work, data, and share it. So that's very much enshrined, that's a key mechanism of the plan, to commit to these regional level surveys on an ongoing basis, and to share that information to assist the projects. So the governance structures themselves are locked in with a suite of policy objectives, and it's kind of a comprehensive structure. Within 6 months, it will be established. There'll be an overall South Coast DMAP implementation programme body, and a number of working groups, importantly a marine ecosystems and ornithology working group, which will inform the scope, that initial scope of survey work, and on an ongoing basis meet at least every 6 months, and inform, advise, and monitor and review the effectiveness of the plan and the effectiveness of the policy objectives and how they are being implemented, and the effectiveness of implementing mitigation. There'll also be technical working groups and other sectoral, but these will be inclusive. They'll be cross-governmental, they'll be cross-sectoral, and include roles for environmental NGOs, etc. So it's an inclusive and dynamic implementation governance structure. And again, that was very much shaped through the consultation process, and strengthened on the back of that consultation process. The coexistence is very important, and again, there's 8 policy objectives included in the final plan for that coexistence piece, especially with fishers. So there's no exclusion on any other activity within the location for ORE. Fishing activity can coexist with the same location as ORE, save for exceptional circumstances such as safety. Fishing activity, the developers of ORE will be obliged through the policy objectives to ensure due regard is had to the right to fish within those same areas as well. So an example of some of those mechanisms we have would be the requirement of project developers to prepare fisheries management and mitigation strategies. As part of that, prepare aquaculture management and mitigation strategies, to prepare cable management plans to make sure any of the inter-array or the cables back to shore don't interfere with fishing activity, etc., and to undertake trials to ensure that's the case, and to maintain an ongoing fishing liaison officer who will engage with fishing communities to ensure that the project level design is cognizant on the need to avoid, minimize and mitigate any impact on fishing activity in those same locations. We have other policy objectives as well included. An example of one strengthened again through the consultation was if the department could commission new shipping analysis based on at least 12 months data, which would be shared in a GIS data repository, and that will help project level risk navigation assessments with strengthened evidence and baseline, so that the positioning of turbines itself avoids any direct impacts or conflict with shipping traffic activity. The locations themselves have avoided the area of highest intensity, but again, these are broad areas. This is to help the actual project level siting of where infrastructure will be located. Land-sea interactions, importantly, whilst we are a maritime plan, we've identified the need for the terrestrial plans at national, regional, local level for alignment to make sure the onshore grid infrastructure, port infrastructure, it is being strengthened and improved sustainably to harness this potential offshore renewable energy, and particularly looking at the port and harbour infrastructure, and at the same time that the national ports policy has been reviewed, the South Coast DMAP recognises that land-based infrastructure and that land-sea interaction piece is critical to implement the plan and critical for the construction and ongoing operation and maintenance of offshore wind energy sites. So there's a lot of policy objectives there that will be very important for the land-based plans at regional and local level for alignment. Also important policy objectives for the transmission infrastructure delivery as well, and that alignment. So this diagram just shown very high level again, that as well as your national planning framework priorities, that you get that consistency at regional level and city and county development plan level. Very much now that we are in the process of making the designated maritime area plans through the National Marine Planning Framework, that the policy objectives in your designated maritime area plan will have an influence, and there should be consistency there through the regional, local level for the necessary onshore infrastructure, and also the beneficial measures in the DMAP for coastal communities, for environmental protection, etc. That the system is aligned, as Marie covered earlier on, that they're kind of hand in glove from a planning perspective. So yeah, we'll see the designated maritime area plan, hopefully the South Coast reflected in the regional spatial economic strategy and the city and county development plans along the South Coast to support the necessary onshore works and infrastructure needed. I'm just going to conclude by looking at the importance, and this was very important throughout the consultation as well, on the economic opportunities, the employment opportunities through the sector, which are considerable. And it's a considered opportunity for Ireland's future, as well as its net transition and energy security, its future prosperity and economic growth in specialised services around the offshore sector and the supply chain. So we very much recognise and support, with objectives, ongoing research, innovation and skills development. That's very much at the forefront of the offshore wind energy task force, looking at that skills development piece and working with the Department of Higher and Further Education on that. So there are supportive objectives there to support the work of higher and further education training providers for regional upskilling and to make sure that the opportunities for employment are kind of felt within the region, and especially within those coastal communities. And some economic analysis that we did undertake with the plan kind of showed again that if about the South Coast DMAP alone, delivery of those areas will generate over 4 billion in gross value added to the Irish economy, and up to 70% of that will be captured within those coastal counties on the South Coast. So it is a significant opportunity for our economic growth, as well as our climate and energy security objectives. So to conclude on the next steps, which this is an important week for us in the department and the process, that following the public consultation, refinement of the plan under the MAP Act, that the final plan, the SEA and final NIS and the EA determination is laid before both houses of the Oireachtas. So the Minister laid them before the Seanad and the Dáil, seeking a resolution to approve the South Coast DMAP in accordance with Section 25.2 of the MAP Act. So that resolution was approved this week on Wednesday, on the 9th of October in Seanad Éireann, and yesterday in Dáil Éireann on the 10th of October. The resolutions were approved. So the Minister will now be able to proceed to declare the South Coast DMAP to be adopted, and it'll be published as the final plan with its final environmental assessments, etc., on the department website shortly. That will then enable the auction to proceed, the Tonua ORES auction to commence in early 2025, and DEC will be moving on to identify the next priorities for designated maritime plans, the programme for future designated maritime area plans. My final just observations, and I kind of was talking with Terry and Heather on the committee before, just as a planner, I have to say what I really kind of saw in this process and learned was that strength of consultation, and the role of a public participation statement in particular was a very effective tool to continually document and outline your objectives for public participation, their outcomes, and to commit to meaningful engagement at the earliest possible stage. It's such a strong influence on the process, and a positive one. The strength of multidisciplinary teams, co-work, like the team working on the plan was multidisciplinary, but especially like working with ecologists, people with environmental engineering, but also people with communication skills, consultation events at community level. So it truly is a multi-skilled discipline. And I think as we engage more in marine spatial planning, we'll all work within increasingly multidisciplinary teams, which is a positive. I found the ecosystems-based approach and that iterative process particularly strong and effective and important. The importance of that evidence-based data sharing, again, just some of the stronger themes coming out from this process has been the need for continually sharing data and good management of that data, and making it available and accessible. So it just showed the strength of that, and particularly for the environmental monitoring, hands-on environmental monitoring of your plan. And that comes across then in the governance structures for implementation, the commitment to regional level surveys, and the commitment to collaborative forums, cross-sectoral, inclusive, that will be part of working groups, continually observing and monitoring the performance of this plan and the performance of its policy objectives. So I'll leave it at that. I've probably gone a bit over time there, but just hope that gave a flavour. And yeah, the department are always available to assist with any queries anyone has. Thanks, Heather.
Rob, thank you so much for that. That was really good. You managed to pack in so much in such a relatively short space of time there. And really good to hear your lessons learned really as a planner, which is, really useful to hear for a lot of us, and also to have those sort of skills development opportunities as well highlighted. Okay, just to keep on track, we'll move on now. So our final speaker today is Dr. Karen Creed. She's going to provide us with an update from MARA. So just while Karen is sharing her screen there, tell you a little bit about Karen. So she joined MARA in January 2024 as the Director of Maritime Authorisations, and Karen has responsibility for the Maritime Area Consents and the Marine Usage Licences. And she's got 25 years experience in the environmental regulation and has held various senior leadership roles across the public sector, including Head of Water Regulation and Dumping at Sea in the EPA, as well as working with Inland Fisheries Ireland. She holds a BSc Zoology and a PhD in freshwater and marine ecology from University of Galway. So, Karen, I will hand everything over to you.
Thanks very much, Heather. Just to check there, am I sharing my full slide?
Yep, everything, I can see everything there.
Perfect. Thanks very much. And thanks to everybody for attending today, especially giving up your lunch break on a Friday. But I think this is it's a great training series, and thanks to the IPI for inviting Mara back again this year to talk to you. We've had a very interesting, exciting and busy year, and I'm delighted to be able to share some of the things we've been up to in the last year with you today. So I suppose just to get back to basics, what do we do? We're an independent agency, and we were set up, a little over a year ago to manage the occupation of the maritime area and to, to enforce the provisions of the new planning regime. We are also required to administer the existing foreshore consent portfolio and to, foster cooperation between regulators in the maritime area. But I'm going to speak to you today specifically about authorizations. And we are responsible for two different types of authorizations: maritime area consents and maritime usage licenses. Now, maritime usage licenses are for specific activities that are carried out in the maritime area and are specified in Schedule 7. And a maritime area consent is basically, a consent to occupy. And since we would have last given the update last year, we've moved on considerably. We've been issuing MACs and MULs, and so what I'm going to do now is share with you the kind of the process, the application process, how we assess them, and to give you a better understanding of what a marine area consent is and what we do. So as I said, a marine area consent is basically a right to occupy, and that's all it is. It is not a consent to carry out development. If you want to carry out development, then you have to apply to On Board Planola or the Coastal Planning Authority to carry out the activity on the area you have the right to occupy. So basically what a MAC is a gateway into the planning system, and you need it before you can enter the planning system. We then carry out an assessment on the applications. But what's quite important here is that because we are now part of a new streamlined planning system, we don't carry out AA or EIA, and there's no public consultation in relation to the MAC process. And that's because both of these things are carried out at the planning stage. We have a requirement to determine a MAC within 90 days of having received all the information we need. And I'll go into all of the detail in this a little later on. And because we are managing that relationship between the state and the MAC holder, and it's a very, important resource, we also have a levy framework for those who are using that resource, so that the taxpayer gets benefit from that. So here's a very brief slide showing our process, our application process. So just to go through this, we have a pre-application consultation process. Now, this is more or less a service that we offer. It's not statutory in nature. Applicants aren't required to do a pre-application consultation, but we do advise that we do, because we find that if you come and attend a pre-application consultation at the right time, when you've had a look at the application and tried to fill it out, it gives the applicant the opportunity to ask any questions or clarifications on the kind of information we're looking for. And we find that that ultimately leads to a better application, and that ultimately again leads to us being able to process applications quicker. The next stage is the submission of that application form and the submission of the appropriate fee. And what's quite important here to note is that we don't start assessing the application until we have the fee. And we have noted that sometimes we do get applications without the fee, and it can be a number of months before we get the fee, despite following up repeatedly. So I would suggest that if you are making an application, submit your fee as well, because we won't start assessing that application until we get the fee. The next stage is the completeness check, which is a very quick check to make sure that we have all of the documentation that is required to be part of the application, that it's actually there. So the next 3 stages I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. So there's the assessment stage, the decision-making stage, and the final determination and publication. So the assessment stage is really a fit and proper person assessment. So, just think about it. We have a very valuable resource. What we don't want is people hoarding that resource. We don't want people who are not technically capable of carrying out what they say they're going to do, or who are not financially viable and able to pay for what they say they're going to do. So it's our job to manage that relationship with the applicant and the ultimate MAC holder, perhaps, to make sure that they are fit and proper in terms of legal and financial issues, that they can build, maintain and operate whatever they're proposing, and also decommission, rehabilitate if required, and that they have the technical capability to do so. So our general assessment consists of a fit and proper assessment in terms of, do you have any convictions? They should have no conviction, should not be insolvent or bankrupt. They need to be tax compliant. And the project also has to be in the public interest and, be cognizant of the relevant legislation. And it has to be consistent with the National Marine Planning Framework and other key sectoral policies and objectives. And it's also important that stakeholder engagement, either engagement having taken place or proposed engagement, is addressed. The technical capability assessment is really to assess the applicant's ability to develop what they say they're going to develop, to operate it, and to decommission or rehabilitate the maritime area where relevant. Now, for this assessment, we break it into 2 different types of assessments. So if it's a Schedule 10 assessment, which are basically the projects that go to on board Planola, or a non-Schedule 10 assessment, which are the smaller projects. And the major difference between the 2 of those, that if we are assessing a Schedule 10 project, the applicant has to have the experience, the technical experience, the corporate experience internally. Whereas if it's a non-Schedule 10 project, they can consult in that experience. As part of this technical assessment, we also have an engineer's assessment. So our engineers will look at the nature and scope of the project. What is this person planning to do? What are the delivery timeframes? And to that end, we usually have a condition in the MACs which requires that the applicant apply for planning permission within 18 months. Again, we don't want people getting MACs and not using the maritime area and hoarding that area. We also look at the extent, the spatial extent and the location of it. Quite a lot of work goes into the accuracy of the maps and whether there are existing property rights and consents in the area or adjacent areas. We also look at what the applicant has done to date in terms of preparatory work or what they plan to do. And again, we look at this point at calculating the applicable levy. Our financial assessment is important to make sure that whoever gets a MAC to use a particular part of the maritime area is financially viable and can fund the project that they say they're going to do. Now, we have a number of tests which are in our financial capability assessment guidance, which is available on our website. And while there are thresholds and tests, we also have to allow for flexibility. So we adopt a comply or explain approach. And what that basically is that while if you're not able to meet all of the tests straight away, you can explain. And this could be important. Something could have happened in the previous year or years in terms of your finances, which were a one-off event, perhaps. And by explaining it, it might be fine. But ultimately, it's up to MARA to decide whether someone is fit and proper person in terms of financial and technical capabilities. So once we've done all of the assessments, we then move on to issuing a minded to determine notice to the applicant. And MARA may at this point decide to grant, part grant, grant with conditions, or refuse an application. So we send out the notice to the applicant, and we also attach the reasons for these conditions in the notice. And the applicant can then supply supplementary information if they so wish. They're not required to, but they can, within a time specified by us. So usually we give about 3 weeks for the applicant to supply any supplementary information they want in relation to the reasons, and the reasons only, for our decision. Now, what I would say is, if you don't want to supply supplementary information, you should come back and tell us that you're happy with what you see, and you don't want any further. You don't want to give us any further information, because then we can move on to issue the determination. So if there's further supplementary information provided, we assess that and take it into account before we issue our final determination. We put the MAC map and the MAC itself up on our website, and at that point then the 8-week judicial review period begins. And also then within 1 month the MAC levy has to be paid. Now, I'm not going to go through this in any great detail, but the levy should provide a return to the taxpayer for the use of this very valuable marine resource. And we've divided it into kind of, A and B, 2 different types of levy, depending on whether you're in the near shore area or you're in the outer maritime area. So in the near shore area, it's a base annual charge plus a rate per meter squared. But that's based also on multiple tiers. So for example, if you're near a large urban area like Dublin or Cork, it'll be much more expensive than if you're in a more rural location. With regards to the outer maritime area, there's 2 different categories. We have a per kilometre cost of about 20,000 per kilometre for the outer maritime area, and we also have a 2% on turnover once we get to the operational phase. But all of that is available on our website, so you can look that up in detail. So I get asked quite a lot, what kind of applications are we getting? And everyone thinks it's mainly ORE type applications, and we certainly are getting a lot of ORE type applications, and they can be very complex applications, as you can see here. We've ORE, we've wind, we've ORE supporting infrastructure, but we also have a lot of other things like cables, utilities, coastal protection and flood relief. But by far, the most applications we get are from the tourism and recreation sector. And that's things like, coastal paths, walkways, water activity parks, that kind of stuff. And there on the other side, you can see a kind of a breakdown of, the geographical regions that we're getting our applications. And it's, fairly well spread out around the country. Some areas we're getting a little bit more. But what's interesting to note here is that not all pre-application meetings are turning into applications. Now, there might be a lag in terms of we're a new organisation and we've a lot more applications to get, obviously, but it's also a sign that sometimes people come and talk to us at a pre-application stage too early and they're not ready to make an application form, So what I would say is, you really shouldn't be coming to talk to us until you're fairly advanced in your application. That is when it is of the most value to you, when you've had a look at all of the guidance documents and you know the questions you want to ask. So how do we decide which applications we're going to do? You saw there the number and types of applications we have. So how do we decide, in what order to do these? So in order to be fair and transparent in how we decide that, we've done a prioritization framework, which is available on our website. And this is basically a weighted-based algorithm that considers phase 1 special max, offshore renewable energy, ports, critical marine infrastructure to support the delivery and deployment of offshore wind projects, telecommunications infrastructure, risk to life and policy and regulation. But what if you don't fall into any of those categories? So we know all of those have a priority, but if you don't see yourself there, we've also added other things like age of application and assessment status, so that every application gets done in a fair way. But the detail on that is available on our website. So I've spoken a lot about, if you want to apply for a MAC, what the process is, but what if you already have an existing foreshore authorization? Well, if you have an existing foreshore authorization, there are transitional provisions in place. So Section 105 allows that you can apply for a MAC to replace your existing foreshore authorization if you want to do an amendment or you want to continue to occupy the maritime area after the expiration of that foreshore authorization, or if you want to do a transfer. And, there are also transitional provisions in relation to unauthorized maritime usages. So if you have an unauthorized maritime usage before the 12th of August 2021, you have 5 years from the 17th of July 2023 to apply to MARA for a new authorization, a new maritime area consent. But we have to treat that application like it's an application for an existing usage. So what do you do if you were already in the planning system before MARA was set up and before the requirements of the MAC Act? Well, for certain developments that had entered the planning prior to the establishment of MARA, and we'll take those that were before on board Planola, if you were at pre-application consult before the 1st of October 2022, and you have submitted an application to On Board Planola by the 1st of October 2024, then you have 2 years after you get that planning consent to apply to MARA for a MAC. And if you had planning permission granted by the coastal planning authorities before the 17th of July 2020, before the 17th of July 2023, you had until the 17th of July 2024. So that has actually passed. But the clock has certainly started for, unauthorized maritime usages and others that you should really start looking at getting those applications in.
Aaron,
So
sorry,
looking
can I get you to bring
to
it
wrap
to a
up?
close shortly?
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. So we're currently undertaking our financial capability assessment review. So that will be going to public consultation shortly, and I'll fly through these. This is an important one in terms of fit and proper assessment. So MARA can declare someone a fit and proper person for certain persons or classes of persons. We have to be cognizant of the legal nature of that person and whether they have a statutory function or not. But this could be huge in terms of processing of applications and the speed at which they can be done. We currently have a competitive call out for assistance in designing a framework for awarding competitive MACs, with the hope that that framework will be in place next year. And finally, I'll just speak to our strategy. So we were required to have a strategy within 12 months. We've done that, and that will be launched in Q4. I think that's as fast as I can go through those ones, Heather. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Karen. That was great.